Hello, and welcome to the Rose Bros podcast. The following is a conversation with Mark Becker. Mark was the co-founder of Fenway Exploration, a private energy company which was eventually sold for a multi-mullion-dollar exit that returned multiples to its original shareholders. Mark earned his chemical engineering degree from the University of Calgary and worked at a variety of engineering roles in the energy industry before starting Fenway. Mark also co-founded Fenway with Mike Rutherford, another recent guest on the podcast who has since started Rundle Eco-Services, an interesting company that recycles commercial plastic in the energy industry. Mark has since retired from business but likes to spend his time skiing, golfing, and spending time with his friends and family. We talked about how Mark and his partner Mike bootstrapped their energy company to a multi-mullion-dollar exit, the value of relationships in business, green energy opportunities, meeting Chip Wilson of Lululemon fame as a student, and a lot more. Also, apologies in advance for the abrupt ending to the podcast, as we had some technical difficulties when recording the show. Enjoy. Mark, good morning.
Good morning, Trevor.
How's it going?
It's going great. Very happy that I'm down here in California right now and enjoying the beautiful weather down here and putting up with the COVID.
Originally, you were an engineer, but you're also an entrepreneur. For anyone that does listen, how would you describe yourself?
Yeah, I graduated as an engineer and entered the oil business, as most people that graduate from U of C or U of A ended up doing in the early 80s. I started my career with Dome Petroleum and basically was trained as a petroleum engineer. And I always had a desire to get my own company going in the oil and gas business. But certainly I knew early on that it's going to take a lot of experience to ever take that step. So 1981 graduate, I left the full-time employment of a employer in the year 2000 to seek a consulting role because I felt that would give me a better opportunity to see what was out there in terms of chances for me to start my own oil and gas company. And in doing a consulting role, I felt that I wasn't tied to the company in case I came up with an idea of where to start an oil and gas company. And at one of my consulting jobs, I was shown a play that exhibited a lack of infrastructure alongside the Alberta border inside Saskatchewan. That meant that there was a lack of development because there was a lack of pipelines and infrastructure. From there, I decided to do some research on the area, and it led to me posting land to buy the mineral right. It's a very organic kind of company that got started right then and there. Started off with purchasing the mineral rights in Saskatchewan and then developing a reason to drill a well and eventually discovering oil and going on to turn it into a productive oil company.
Did you always want to be an entrepreneur, or did you view yourself more as an engineer, technical guy?
When I was working for the larger oil and gas companies, I just didn't have the same ability to deliver what the larger companies wanted in terms of just how I would react to requests or what have you. I just knew that I was a little bit more of an independent thinker and just not the kind of person that they were going to turn into a vice president in any of the companies that I was working for, because I a little bit of a contrarian and didn't quite fit the mold of the large oil and gas companies. So I guess I didn't know that when I first started. I thought I would be, trying to rise through the ranks like all the other engineers that were hired at the same time I was. But by 5 years into my career, I knew that just wasn't going to be the route for me. When we would have annual meetings, I was the person who would raise his hand and ask the tough questions for our own company, and they never liked that. Once I decided that I wasn't the right mold for the large oil and gas company, I started to come up with the idea that maybe I wanted to have my own operation. Even when I was working for companies where I was a an employee, I always had my eye open for an opportunity. But at the same time, I also knew that it's not really a good practice to be hunting for your own opportunities when someone else is paying you to find oil and gas for them or develop oil and gas or whatever it may be. So then in 2000, I left my last full-time employment job and started a little shell company or called Charleswood Energy. And that's what I used to go and buy mineral rights in Saskatchewan. Then once I had the mineral rights, then it was a time to come up with a plan and figure out how to finance and get a well drilled.
Yeah.
I just happened to have a good friend who, first of all, believed in me, which was very, very important, but also had done very well in other oil and gas ventures.
That's Mike Rutherford.
That would be Mike Rutherford.
Yep. Shout out to Mike.
Yeah, shout out to Mike. Yeah. You know, the one thing that I can say about having Mike join me in forming Fenway Exploration is that he was always a very good partner. When we made a decision to drill a well, work over on a well, whatever it was, once the decision was made, there was never any finger pointing. If we decided that we were going to drill a well and the well was unsuccessful, there was no lamenting the fact or second guessing the decision. You know, that was a very important part of being able to get Fenway off the ground.
When you entered the oil and gas / energy industry in the early 80s, how come you went into that industry? Was it kind of just what everyone did and there was a lot of opportunity at the time?
In 1981, when I graduated, the oil and gas business was going through a few ups and downs, but the opportunities that were available in terms of starting salary and the opportunity to advance, very few of the people who graduated in my year did anything but go into the oil and gas business. Yeah. And that means civil engineers, the mechanical engineers, the chemical engineers, the electrical engineers. All of these people ended up going into the oil and gas business because the jobs were there, the salary was good. Just an anecdote, in our graduating year in chemical engineering, we had 61 people graduating. And in February of the year that we were graduating, one of the professors came into our class and said, "Does anyone in this room not have a job yet?" This is before we graduated.
Yeah.
And one person put up his hand because he had to repeat a course and he wasn't going to graduate.
Yeah.
He had a job.
That's amazing.
61 out of 61 got jobs, and jobs that they were very happy to start.
Probably good paying jobs too.
Very good paying jobs, yes. Like even if you weren't going to graduate, you had a job offer. And as we know, that's not the case now.
Yeah, well, maybe get into how things have changed because that was a few years ago. Canadian energy is a little different than it is today, but getting back to your entrepreneurial career. So you spent quite a bit of time though in a larger company. That was like 20 years. Did you ever think to yourself you wanted to go out on your own sooner?
Yeah, I was testing the waters prior to 2000 when I did become a consultant. There was a couple of ideas that I had that we would approach, not we, but I would approach people that were renowned for raising money. And a couple of different times they told me, your idea is too specific, you don't have ability to expand on it, we can't raise money for that. So I had a few other ideas, probably starting as early as 1988, 1989. But it wasn't until 2000 that I felt I had gone enough miles and seen enough things that it was time to move.
Because that's a long time. 20 years is like, but I guess you were thinking about it the whole time. And
yeah, and the whole time you are gaining an experience, and would hate to miss out on any of the experience that I had encountered through my career, because it was also important once you had your own oil company to run.
Oil and gas, you need a lot of experience to become an entrepreneur in, or it seems like you do. Did you ever think about going into a different industry to try and start your own business?
Not really, no. You spend so much time learning the different skills that you need in the oil and gas business, because none of it is taught in university, of course. Like when I graduated from U of C, there was no petroleum engineering, civil, mechanical, chemical, etc. And you would become a petroleum engineer through your training. The training can take a long time because you change disciplines from reservoir engineering to drilling to completions to facilities to joint ventures. All these things are so important, and to develop just a limited amount of expertise in each one of these areas can take a lot of time.
And at the end of the day, you kind of knew there was entrepreneurial opportunities back then, whereas nowadays, it just doesn't seem like there is any.
That's correct. One of the things that has really changed for the entrepreneurial opportunities in the oil and gas business is the regulatory bodies were not terrified of small companies at the time that I started Fenway. Mike and I started Fenway.
Yeah.
Whereas today, they put a lot of roadblocks in your way because they're so afraid that you're going to not be successful and you're going to turn more wells over to the Orphan Well Association. And so therefore, the regulatory bodies are not comfortable with small entrepreneurs getting into the oil and gas business in today's reality.
In terms of entrepreneurship in oil and gas, is it also because there's less oil available now, or why is there less entrepreneurship going on in?
There isn't any less oil and gas out there. One of the trends that has happened recently is that the shale plays have dominated the oil and gas business for a number of years now, and they are not structured for small oil and gas opportunities because they need large land positions, long laterals, and very expensive fracking programs in order to deliver the oil and gas. And that's something that a small entrepreneur will never be able to put together.
Yeah, exactly.
In today's world. When Fenway started, we were drilling vertical wells, non-stimulated wells, and bringing them on production for in the order of $400,000. So that's a scale that is achievable for a small entrepreneur. But some of the wells that are being drilled today are typically a $5 million price tag. The difference between trying to get your hands on $400,000 versus $5 million is just a great leap of faith.
For sure. Well, even drilling oil wells in the beginning is not exactly a hard science. There's a lot of almost probabilities that go into it, I guess you'd say.
Absolutely right. One of the things that when you would explain what I was doing in Fenway to like my investment broker who handled my RRSP and whatnot, he would ask a bunch of questions and then we would get into the risk side of it. And he would say, well, what's the probability of success on this well? Because I was telling him about this well that we were going to drill. And I said, well, if you really look at it closely, it's no better than a 25% chance of success.
Yeah.
And as an investment manager, he was absolutely blown away that I was willing to risk $1 of my own money on a 25% chance of success.
Yeah.
It is a reality that you can never get away from. When I was first starting Fenway, my family asked if they should think about putting some money in with me. And I said, I just couldn't expose you to this kind of risk because it would feel so terrible to not be able to deliver a rate of return. And you can convince yourself to do something like this because you kind of know the risks, have lived the risks, you know the upside, you know the downside. But for somebody who would be a passive investor, I wouldn't allow them to invest in my company because I would be too disappointed if it didn't work.
Things did work out pretty good for Fenway. You guys did drill some good wells, and long story short, ended up selling the company. It was a time when you could be a successful entrepreneur in oil and gas.
Yes, of course, the trust model had disappeared by the time Fenway was doing well, but we were still of the size that a slightly larger company could come along and buy us out without having to pay a huge premium or whatnot. So yeah, Fenway drilled 4 wells and we didn't have any economic production to show for it. We were quite a ways underwater. Then finally, the opportunity came to drill a well offsetting our competitor's well that was drilled very close to our land. One of the things that I did in order to gain confidence to take the next step to drill another well is I did a lot of scouting. Scouting is gathering of your competitor's information through whatever means possible.
Yeah.
And so in some cases, it would be, I would just drive onto their location at night when everyone was gone, and there was a clipboard left in the well shack with the daily production.
Really?
Wasn't even hidden. So I was able to gather that information, and I was able to understand that this is a well that was in the range of like 80 to 90 barrels a day of oil. And
which is pretty good.
Which is very good, because at that time, oil was still trading at between the $80 and $100 a barrel range.
And you could subtract all your costs off and come home with what, $20, $30 of profit every day per barrel?
Sometimes more than that. Basically,
it was a good business.
It was a good business. The first thing you have to do is, when you establish that you have oil production, you're not going to have the facilities in order to sell your product straight to market. So you have to go through a third-party processor in order to turn the oil from wet oil to pipeline oil. That led to the production being encumbered by a third party making processing revenue off of it. But subsequent to bringing on a good well, we were able to develop the facilities ourselves that we could make pipeline spec oil, and that's when we could start really banking the money.
Based on that information, you drilled the well. It was a good well, obviously.
Yes, it was better than we even expected. It came in eventually at 100 barrels a day, and a lot of wells in this part of the world have downtime issues where the pump sands off, all kinds of different issues. This was an exceptional well that just ran 24 hours a day, every month, never went down, and didn't have sand problems. It was just an exceptional well, and it took us from being very much underwater to having all our shareholder loans paid back in a very short amount of time.
And so did you guys drill more wells after that?
Yeah, after having the success with our good well, we approached an industry contact and got them to farm in on our land position. And that allowed us to drill more wells at a lower working interest and diversify our production a little bit. And eventually we were able to get our production up to 200 barrels a day of heavy oil.
It got to that point and you were able to start the process of thinking of selling the company then?
Well, the process kind of exists the entire time due to desire of everyone to get payback on their investment, what have you. The company that we scouted their successful well and then drilled beside them, they were going to be the natural person to buy us out. They expanded their position in the area. They had us surrounded, and they would make frequent overtures to us to buy our position, but it was always at a kind of an insult style price. I took it as an insult, being a very black and white, you're trying to buy this from me when it's worth this much. And so I would kind of rebuff them and not engage them. However, fortunately for me, my partner in Fenway, Mike Rutherford, looked at things slightly differently. He has a different background. He's much more gregarious, and his idea was that we need to meet with these people, sit down with them, get to know them a little bit, and convince them why we think our property is worth more than they continue to offer. And to me, that just wasn't a thought that would ever come into my head. But on Mike's urging, we got together with our competitor, and it started off with a casual encounter on St. Patrick's Day. And we invited the CEO of this competitor to come and have a beer with us on St. Patrick's Day. So he showed up with a binder full of material, and he thought we were going to negotiate. The plan was, no, we're not going to negotiate. We're going to get to know each other a little bit, and we can negotiate in the future. So we ended up having a great time at St. Patrick's Day. Didn't talk business, talked skiing, talked Calgary Flames, talked many other things, consumed a few pints of beer, and from there forward, the dialogue between us was much more positive and friendly. And within a short period of time after that, we agreed on a deal, and they bought us out in spring of 2014. And the good thing about that was oil price was still at the $80 to $100 a barrel at that point. And it was September of 2014 when the big oil price decline started.
Mm-hmm. It was almost the beginning of the end, it seems, for Canadian energy. But how important do you think personal relations were in getting that deal done? I mean, you had a good property, but at the end of the day, it seems like it was more of extending the olive branch.
It was huge because left to my devices, I would continue to tell them that wasn't enough, but I didn't tell them what was enough.
Yeah.
And I didn't suggest alternate means of, finding a solution, just because of my kind of person I am, and I'm very black and white, and, kind of a more of an engineering mindset to running the company than a little bit more entrepreneurial. Mike Rutherford was the guy that said, no, we have to establish a relationship with these people in order to have a successful conclusion. And he was absolutely right. And it was very important for getting the deal that we needed in order to sell the Fenway production.
How important do you think relationships are in business in general?
They are so much more important than I would have thought when I graduated as an engineer. My opinion at that time was that people that got a phys ed degree and entered the oil and gas business were kidding themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's not the case at all. When you enter the oil and gas business, you start making relationships, and some of the most successful oil and gas people come from a variety of backgrounds, whether it's played sports at UFC or took the kinesiology or whatever it is. All that is just your ticket into the dance, so to speak. And then from there, it's relationships are so important in order to advance your career and to get where you want to go.
Was that because of the nature of oil and gas? Do you think that applies to business in general?
I don't think it's specific to oil and gas. I think it's the way that the world works. What I think now is that social intelligence is so much more important than book learning, and that this is a social world that relationships matter no matter what business you're in. I don't know a business in the world that wouldn't be made better by having people that have strong social intelligence and good relationships.
Because nowadays it's all about writing code and kind of the engineering side of things, and that's what a lot of emphasis is on. But at the end of the day, you still need to communicate with people and explain your ideas to the world.
Yeah, absolutely right. Like I say, I don't think there's a business where relationships and social intelligence and whatnot aren't almost more important than the underlying idea.
Was Chip Wilson at UFC when you were there?
Yes, he was. I happened to meet Chip through my roommate in residence one year. And my first impression of this Chip guy was like, why does this guy have such a big smile on his face all the time? Like, he was the happiest guy I'd ever seen. Ear to ear grin, and so positive, just kind of beaming with some kind of energy that you didn't see in other people.
Really?
And I don't think he had any specific ideas or knowledge. He just knew that his social intelligence and his relationships delivered him to a very lofty position.
It kind of reminds me of the guy who, he was an athlete, and eventually ended up, yeah, and now he's a billionaire. It just reminded me of that kind of emotional intelligence, the importance of that skill and whatnot. And
that's the one thing that I've learned through all the steps I've taken in this business, is that I had no idea how important it was to build relations. And I look back on some of the conduct that I had early in my career, and it was just going in the wrong direction. It was thinking that good ideas and strong knowledge of your product or your science was the most important thing, and it really isn't. There's no one person that's going to know everything, but if you have good relationships, you're going to know who to listen to, whereas if you're isolated, you have no one to listen to.
Yeah. But for instance, if you listen to someone like Elon Musk nowadays, everyone talks about him now because he's obvious, and maybe Peter Thiel, they will tell you it's all about hard science and ideas, but they're also really good communicators.
Yeah. My thoughts on Elon Musk would be that if he if he didn't have the ability to raise money, then he would not have gone anywhere, because all these great ideas are fine, but unless you grab the bull by the horns and drag it, it's not going anywhere. And he had to raise money.
Yeah, for sure.
That is relationships. In order for you to go in to any bank, or no matter what the scenario is, you have to be able to convince these people that your idea is good, and that's communication. And that's understanding how to tell these people what it is they need to know. And Elon Musk he's a brilliant scientist, but without the ability to raise money and convince people of his ideas are sound, then he'd be sitting in a basement somewhere.
I think in 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, he describes Elon as the grandmaster of sales. He does it without you even knowing it.
Sales is so important.
Yeah.
That's another thing that every person has to sell. You have to sell yourself in order to get a job, in order to raise money. And I didn't understand that, but it took a long time, but I came to understand what I was missing and what I needed. Having a partnership with somebody that had some of those skills in abundance turned out to be a very important thing for our little company.
Did you see technical people like yourself maybe not learn that lesson along the way and kind of have problems as a result?
Oh, yes. I have seen people that are very good at what they do, and they don't like to network. They don't like to spread themselves too thin. They're always too busy. It's interesting to me that some of the people that are very, very successful and you would think would be too busy for these kinds of things, those are the people that make time for it. They understand the importance of relationships and having circles and whatnot. And so I've seen people who were very brilliant engineers and very good at their field, but they didn't expand their networks. They didn't understand how important it was to have the social relationships, and so they become an expert in their field, and they're never going to start their own company. They're well respected and whatnot, but they become a technical specialist. And that wasn't something that I thought was going to get me where I wanted to go.
Yeah, for sure. On the other hand, you don't want to be the guy who is all talk either, right? There has to be some substance to your business idea, your technical ability.
Yeah, absolutely right. Like there's a difference between talking and bullshitting.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure you've seen your fair share of that too.
Oh, absolutely. Once Fenway sold its production, we were sitting with cash, and we were looking for other opportunities. And there is a host of opportunities with people out there trying to sell you on buying properties, farming in on properties, being a partner on a well. It's all out there. So we spent 2 years of attending meetings and meeting with people and evaluating plays, and we came close to buying out one other little small company that had oil production. We looked high and low, and we heard stuff that made sense. We heard stuff that made no sense whatsoever. There's lots of people that are trying to make a go of it any way they can. And yeah, so you hear every story under the book. Some are good and some are not.
I guess you have to blend the two at the end of the day and ultimately be successful.
Yep, that's how it comes. That's the long and short of it.
And when you sold your company, it was right before Canadian oil and gas kind of took a turn for the worst. We're in a position now with energy in Canada where it's not very good. Why do you think we're in this position? Is it government policy? Is it changing of the times? Is it the fact that Canada is a price taker? Why do you think energy in Canada has really suffered?
Well, we do have quite a unique situation inside Canada. Our oil and gas is virtually landlocked.
Yeah.
We don't have access to coastlines British Columbia does, but they don't want to grant that to Alberta for whatever reasons. But the world has awoke to climate change, and I think even people that work in the oil and gas business and continue to work in the oil and gas business will acknowledge, if they're being honest, that man has had an effect on the environment, and that the use of fossil fuels is something that has to be examined and put in the proper context. I think there's a problem right now with idealism and reality. I agree that it would be nice if we were not continuing to do the polluting things that we're doing. Like, we can all come up with documentaries on whether it's bleaching of coral reefs or destroying habitat for whatever animal or area of the world. So I think we all realize that man is creating problems on Earth, and that we need to change our behaviors in some ways. But the problem that we see right now is that we have a lot of idealism, where some people can come out and say, well, we can just go off of oil and we'll live on solar and wind and good intentions. I get a sense that is part of the education curriculum these days. The younger people are being told all the evils of oil and gas and whatnot, but they're not being taught the reality of how the world is going to get enough energy if they completely go away from oil and gas. Norway is a good example of a country that has made huge profits off oil and gas, and they created this massive sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah.
And now they can sit back and dictate to the world about how you should shun oil and gas investment, and you must convert to all electric cars and wind power and solar power, and all these things have to take over. And they wouldn't be able to do that if they hadn't amassed this incredible wealth through the oil and gas.
Well, meanwhile, they still are producing lots of oil and gas too.
Of course they are. And they're leading the world in electric vehicles. Well, that's fine for certain environments. They have like 9% of the charging stations in the world and 0.9% of the population. They are the richest country in the world, and they're influencing how people think about what to do on a go-forward basis. Yeah, it's a very complicated situation. The biggest problem we have in Canada, I think, is that we want to be the good citizens of the world. We want to do the right thing. And there's some people that think that we should sacrifice our livelihoods and give up our natural resources in order to lead the world towards a cleaner future. And the reality of that just doesn't make sense, and it's not going to happen. In Canada, we can't go to all electric vehicles due to the environment that we live in, where we have huge distances between cities. We have very, very low population density in a big part of our country.
Do you think a lot of that talk in videos and speeches is hyperbole, with the idea being it's meant to kind of scare people into action?
Well, I think that's probably a part of it. But then again, for every example that it's an exaggeration, you have people treating it as gospel. And that, yes, we must never burn another MCF of gas or a barrel of oil. And that just can't work. And that's where the education system needs to have some ability to connect idealism and reality. And I see a real shortcoming in that.
Have you noticed big changes in the technology for, say, green energy in the last 10, 20 years, coming from a technical background?
It's not significant, I don't believe. Solar panels have got more efficient. Wind power is being embraced. But, for example, down here in Palm Springs, there's one of the largest and oldest wind farms in the United States.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And it has gone bankrupt at least 2 or 3 times. On any given day when you drive through this wind farm, there will be maybe 2/3 of the turboprops spinning, and 1/3 will be inactive, whether they need to be repaired or whatever. So wind power it's a good way to get power when the wind blows. And the same thing with solar power. It's a good way to get power when the sun shines, but it's not always like that. And people like Elon Musk will say that, well, someday we'll be able to get all of our power from the sun. That may be, but we're not there now. And
I think that's where the crossroads is, where it intersects, is the reality of what we need right now, today, to drive to the supermarket, and hopefully what we'll get maybe 5-10 years from now.
Yeah, it's absolutely correct. And some of the things that we're told by pro-oil and gas proponents is that we don't need less oil and gas, we need more, because we have countries like China and India that are going to consume much more energy as they improve their standards and kind of come into the first world way of living.
But at the same time, I think I've read that the cost of solar panels is going down every year and that the technology is improving. Do you think it's near a point where it may be affordable to use for most people?
Well, I think certainly in the sunnier parts of the world, like Southern California and whatnot, as that technology gets better, it will deliver more and more of the power that's required. But right now, California has rolling blackouts because they have tried to close down natural gas and certainly coal-fired. I think we can all admit that coal-fired is a very poor way to generate electricity in today's world. But here in California, they've overstepped their bounds and stepped more into solar and wind power, and there's times where that just can't deliver. There's too much demand, and so you have rolling blackouts, and the day isn't today that solar and wind can deliver all the power that's needed.
Do you think it's kind of an opportunity in a sense to get into fields like that now because the problem's so big?
It certainly may be. There's a lot of questions about when you're building solar panels, where do you get the minerals and the rare earth minerals and whatnot that you need? How do you get them? How long does a solar panel last? Can you recycle a solar panel? It's the same question with the batteries situation. In chasing rare earth minerals to build some of these devices, is it any less hard on the environment than producing oil and gas?
Right.
In a lot of cases, the answer is it's equally as tough on the environment, if not worse. And I believe that with people like Elon Musk and the pure scientists looking for more ways to deliver the power that the sun is beaming down on the earth, that things will get better.
Hey, thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you liked what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. You can also find our coffee and chocolate there, where we plant one tree for every bag or bar sold through our partnership with One Tree Planted, a cool non-for-profit organization focused on global reforestation. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.